The weather service said we had 20 minutes. The news said 15. My phone alert said 10. They were all catastrophically wrong. But there was one sign, something so subtle that 99% of people miss it, that told me we had seconds, not minutes. Why don't they teach you this? I remember that Sunday morning like it was yesterday, even though it's been years now. May 25th, 2008, a date that's burned into my memory alongside birthdays and anniversaries, except this one comes with a sick feeling in my stomach every time I think about it. The day started so perfectly ordinary, it almost feels cruel looking back. I woke up around 8:30 to sunlight streaming through our bedroom curtains, and for once, the house was actually quiet. No kids screaming, no neighbors mowing their lawns at the crack of dawn like they usually do on weekends, just peaceful silence that made me want to stay in bed forever. My wife Sarah was already up making coffee in the kitchen, humming some song I didn't recognize. She does that when she's in a good mood. Hums these random melodies that probably don't exist anywhere except in her head. I found it annoying back then, if I'm being honest. Now I'd give anything to hear it again. The weather felt warm but not hot, you know? That perfect spring temperature where you don't need a jacket, but you're not sweating either. The sky had some clouds rolling around, but nothing that looked threatening, just normal Iowa weather doing its usual thing. I remember thinking it was going to be one of those lazy Sundays where the biggest decision would be whether to grill burgers or order pizza. See, graduation season was in full swing around Parkersburg. Our little town of 3,000 people suddenly felt alive with all these families planning parties and celebrations. The high school had just finished their ceremony the week before, and everyone was still riding that wave of excitement. Kids posting pictures everywhere, parents bragging about college plans, the whole 9 yards. Sarah kept talking about the Hendersons' graduation party happening that afternoon for their daughter Katie. I wasn't particularly excited about standing around making small talk with neighbors about lawn care and gas prices, but Sarah loved that stuff. She could chat with anyone about anything for hours. Made her happy, so I figured we'd show up, eat some potato salad, and call it a good day. The local weather forecast that morning mentioned some possible storms later in the day. Nothing unusual though. Iowa gets storms all the time, especially in late spring. The weatherman on Channel 8 said something about scattered thunderstorms and maybe some hail. Standard stuff that makes you think about bringing in the patio furniture, not running for your life. I spent most of the morning puttering around the garage, organizing tools, and pretending to fix things that weren't really broken. Sarah was doing laundry and cleaning house, which she always did on Sundays like clockwork. We had this routine down pat after 15 years of marriage, comfortable, predictable, maybe a little boring if I'm being completely honest. Around noon, we drove over to my mother-in-law's place to check on her garden. Dorothy was 78 and stubborn as a mule, insisting she could still handle all her own yard work. Sarah worried about her constantly, especially since Dorothy lived alone in that big old house on the south side of town. The same south side that would become ground zero for what was coming. Dorothy seemed fine that day, chattering away about her tomato plants and complaining about the squirrels getting into her bird feeders. She offered us lunch, which she always did, and we politely declined, which we always did. Just another normal interaction in what felt like a completely normal day. The weird part is how normal everything stayed, right up until it wasn't. People were walking their dogs, kids were riding bikes, teenagers were probably complaining about being bored like teenagers do everywhere. Life was just happening the way it always happens in small towns across America. But here's what I didn't know then. While we were all going about our Sunday routines, something massive was already brewing in the atmosphere above us. Weather systems were colliding and building energy in ways that would have terrified us if we'd understood what was coming. The same innocent-looking clouds I'd dismissed that morning were quietly organizing themselves into something monstrous. The National Weather Service was starting to take notice too, though they hadn't issued any serious warnings yet. Just routine weather watches that most people ignore anyway. Makes sense, right? You can only hear severe thunderstorm warnings so many times before you stop taking it seriously. Looking back now, I wonder if there were signs we missed. Subtle changes in the air pressure, animals acting strange, that feeling you sometimes get before something big happens. But honestly, I don't remember anything like that. It just felt like another sleepy Sunday in Parkersburg, Iowa. Little did we know that in just a few hours, everything would change forever. The peaceful morning we'd been enjoying was actually the last normal moment our town would ever have. I was sitting in my living room scrolling through Facebook like any other lazy Sunday afternoon when my phone suddenly erupted with this obnoxious blaring sound that made me nearly drop my coffee all over myself. The emergency alert flashed across the screen at exactly 4:22 p.m. I remember the time because I was annoyed that it interrupted my mindless social media browsing. Severe tornado warning for Butler County, it read, and honestly, my first thought wasn't panic. It was irritation. We get these warnings all the time in Iowa, right? Every spring, the Weather Service goes crazy with alerts for storms that end up being nothing more than heavy rain and some wind. I've lived through dozens of these so-called severe warnings, and 90% of the time, the worst thing that happens is maybe a tree branch falls in someone's yard. But then the siren started, and something felt different about this one. The sound wasn't the usual brief wail we're used to hearing during the monthly tests. This was continuous, urgent, almost angry. It kept going and going until even my neighbor's dog started howling along with it. I walked outside to see what everyone else was doing, and that's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop a little. People were actually moving fast. Mrs. Henderson across the street was practically dragging her patio furniture into her garage. The Johnsons were shouting at their kids to get inside immediately. These aren't the kind of people who panic over nothing. You know, they've been through Iowa storms for decades, but here they were, moving with this frantic energy I'd never seen before. My phone buzzed again. Text from my sister in Cedar Falls, "Are you watching the weather? They're saying it looks really bad." Then another buzz. "My mom, get to your basement now." Then my coworker Sarah, "Turn on the news, they're talking about a wedge tornado heading your way." Wedge tornado? I had no idea what that meant, but it sounded terrifying. I rushed back inside and flipped on Channel 7, where meteorologist Jim Hedrick was standing in front of his weather map, looking more serious than I'd ever seen him. His usual calm demeanor was completely gone, replaced by this urgent, almost pleading tone that immediately got my attention. "Folks, this is not a drill," he was saying, pointing at this massive red blob on his radar screen. "We have a confirmed large tornado on the ground, moving northeast toward Parkersburg. This is an extremely dangerous situation. If you're in the path of this storm, you need to take shelter immediately." The phone rang, my neighbor Janet, and she was practically yelling into the receiver. "Can you see it yet? My brother-in-law just called from New Hartford. He says it's huge, like nothing he's ever seen before. He's been storm chasing for 20 years. I hung up and stepped back outside, looking south toward where this thing was supposedly coming from. The sky looked weird, sure, but I still couldn't see anything that screamed killer tornado approaching. That's the thing about these storms, until they're right on top of you, it's hard to believe they're really as bad as everyone says. But then my phone started going absolutely crazy. Text after text, call after call. People were checking on each other with this desperate urgency that was starting to freak me out. My aunt from 3 towns over was calling to make sure I was safe. Coworkers were texting from Des Moines, asking if I was okay. When does that ever happen during a regular storm warning? The weird part is how quickly the mood in town shifted from normal Sunday afternoon to full-blown emergency mode. 1 minute, kids were riding bikes in the street, and the next, parents were screaming at them to get inside. 1 minute, people were grilling in their backyards, and the next, they were dragging everything they could carry into their houses. I started getting this sinking feeling in my stomach, like when you're driving and suddenly realize you might have missed your exit 20 miles back. That moment when you understand something important is happening, but you're not quite sure what it is yet. The sirens kept wailing, now joined by what sounded like every emergency vehicle in Butler County racing through town. Fire trucks, ambulances, police cars, all heading south with their lights flashing. Emergency crews don't mobilize like that for just any storm. Well, turns out my gut feeling was right to be worried, because what was heading our way wasn't just another Iowa thunderstorm that would blow over in 30 minutes. But I wouldn't realize just how terrifyingly right those instincts were until I looked up at the sky a few minutes later and saw something that would change everything I thought I knew about severe weather. I was standing by my kitchen window when I first noticed something wasn't right. The clouds, man, they looked like nothing I'd ever seen before. They weren't just dark anymore. They were moving, actually swirling like someone was stirring chocolate batter up there. But here's the thing that really got to me. They were dropping lower, way lower than clouds should ever be. My neighbor Janet was out watering her petunias like nothing was happening. Makes sense, right? We'd all heard tornado warnings before. Half the time they amount to nothing more than some heavy rain, and maybe a few branches down. But this felt different in my gut. The air itself seemed wrong, thick and heavy like trying to breathe through wet cotton. Then the strangest thing happened. The birds just vanished. 1 second, sparrows were chirping in my oak tree, and the next second, silence, complete, absolute silence. Even the bugs stopped buzzing. When was the last time you heard absolutely nothing outside? It's unsettling as hell. The quiet pressed against my eardrums until I could hear my own heartbeat. I stepped onto my porch, and that's when I saw it. The sky was turning green, not just a little greenish tint. I'm talking full-on emerald green, like someone had slapped a filter over everything. My grandmother always said green skies meant big trouble, but I'd never believed her until that moment. The color seemed to pulse and shift, getting deeper by the minute. Thunder started rolling overhead, but it wasn't normal thunder. This was different, longer, deeper, like the earth itself was groaning. Each rumble seemed to vibrate through my chest cavity. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Dead silence again. The kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. Well, the wind picked up next. Not gradually like you'd expect, but all at once. 1 second, nothing. The next, my wind chimes were going crazy, and leaves were spiraling past my window in perfect little tornadoes. My trash can went tumbling down the street like it was late for an appointment. Poor Janet finally dropped her watering hose and scurried inside. But here's what really freaked me out. The temperature dropped fast. We're talking about a 20-degree plunge in maybe 5 minutes. I could actually feel the cold front hit my face like walking into an air-conditioned store on a hot day. My arms broke out in goosebumps, despite the fact that it had been warm and muggy just minutes before. The clouds kept getting lower and more twisted. They looked angry. If clouds can look angry, these massive dark formations were rotating faster now, clearly visible to anyone brave enough or stupid enough to keep watching. I should have gone to the basement then. Any rational person would have. But something about the whole scene held me there, mesmerized. Then there's the smell. Nobody talks about the smell before a big tornado, but there's definitely one. It's like ozone mixed with wet concrete and something metallic, sharp and clean, but also threatening. My dog Rex started whimpering and scratching at the door to get inside. Animals know things we don't they? Debris started flying past my window, not just leaves and small branches anymore, but real stuff. A lawn chair sailed by like it was auditioning for the circus. Someone's garbage can lid spun past like a frisbee thrown by an invisible giant. A cardboard box tumbled end over end down my street, and I found myself wondering whose moving day was getting ruined. The weird part is how beautiful it all looked at first. Terrifying, yes, but also strangely magnificent. The way the clouds twisted and churned created these incredible formations that seemed almost artistic. Mother Nature showing off her power in the most dramatic way possible. But beauty can be deadly, and I was about to learn that lesson the hard way. My phone started buzzing with emergency alerts, but I didn't need to read them. The evidence was swirling right above my head. The clouds had formed into something that looked like a massive gray-green funnel, and it was getting more organized by the minute. The rotation was becoming tighter, more focused. That's when I heard it, a sound that would haunt my dreams for months afterward. It started as a low rumble, almost like distant thunder, but it didn't fade away. Instead, it grew louder and more intense. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, filling the air with a deep, threatening roar. I finally came to my senses and rushed toward my basement door. But as I reached for the handle, I made the mistake of looking back through my window one more time. What I saw on the horizon made my blood run cold. I was standing in my kitchen when I first saw it. Not the tornado itself. Nobody could see that beast yet, but the wall. This massive dark curtain stretching across the southern horizon like something out of a nightmare. My hands were still wet from washing dishes when my neighbor Jerry called, his voice cracking through the phone. "You need to get outside and look south," he said. Right now, well, I stepped onto my porch, and honestly, I've never felt my stomach drop like that before. This wasn't your typical funnel cloud spinning in the distance. This was a wall of pure destruction, nearly a mile wide, creeping toward us like some ancient monster. The locals started calling it the Wall of Death almost immediately. And trust me, that name stuck for good reason. Makes sense, right? When you see something that massive bearing down on your town, your brain doesn't exactly reach for cheerful nicknames. The weird part is how quiet everything got first. You'd think with a tornado approaching, there'd be chaos everywhere. But for maybe 30 seconds, it felt like the whole world held its breath. No birds chirping, no dogs barking, even the wind stopped. Then crack. The first power line snapped somewhere behind me, and suddenly the air filled with this electrical symphony of destruction. Transformers started exploding left and right, sending these brilliant blue flashes across the darkening sky. I'm not gonna lie, it was terrifying and beautiful at the same time, like watching fireworks during the apocalypse. Each flash lit up that approaching wall, and with every glimpse, the thing looked bigger and closer, way too close. Then there was the sound. Everyone always says tornadoes sound like freight trains, and I used to think that was just some cliché people threw around. But standing there, watching that wall approach, I realized how absolutely accurate that comparison is. Except multiply that train sound by about 50, and add this low, rumbling undertone that you feel in your bones more than hear with your ears. My neighbor across the street, sweet old Mrs. Patterson, was standing in her yard clutching her cat carrier, just staring at the approaching storm. I yelled at her to get inside, but the wind was picking up so fast my words got swallowed before they reached her. Debris was already starting to dance down the street. Small stuff at first, leaves, plastic bags, a garbage can lid spinning like a frisbee. But then heavier things joined the party. Shingles ripped from roofs, tree branches thick as my arm, a mailbox that definitely wasn't there a minute ago. The pressure change hit next, and boy, that's something they don't prepare you for in those safety videos. My ears popped so hard I thought my eardrums might burst. Several car alarms started wailing, probably triggered by the atmospheric pressure or flying debris. The cacophony was getting overwhelming, but underneath it all, that freight train sound kept growing louder and more menacing. I finally snapped out of my trance and ran back inside, grabbing my emergency bag and my dog Rex. Poor guy was already hiding under the kitchen table, shaking like a leaf. Smart animal. He probably felt that storm coming long before any of us humans figured it out. Animals always know, don't they? Racing down to my basement, I could hear my house creaking and groaning above me in ways I'd never heard before. The windows upstairs were rattling so violently, I was sure they'd shatter any second. Through the small basement window, I caught glimpses of my neighbors' houses across the street, and honestly, they looked like dollhouses about to be kicked over by an angry giant. The roar was deafening now. Not just loud, physically painful. I pressed my hands against my ears and it barely helped. Rex was whimpering beside me, and I found myself whispering reassurances I didn't believe. "It's okay, boy. We'll be fine. It'll pass right over us." Even as I said it, I knew we were directly in this monster's path. Through that tiny basement window, the last thing I saw before the real destruction began was the Henderson's swing set getting lifted into the air like it weighed nothing, just floating up and disappearing into that dark wall. Their kids had been playing on that swing set just hours earlier during what felt like a completely different lifetime. The pressure in my ears intensified, and I knew we were about to experience something that would change Parkersburg forever. The wall of death wasn't just approaching anymore, it was here and it was hungry for destruction. What happened in the next few minutes would turn our quiet Sunday afternoon into something none of us would ever forget, assuming we lived through it. I was in my basement when everything went to hell, and honestly, I thought I'd prepared for this moment my whole life. Growing up in Iowa, you hear about tornadoes constantly. They're like that crazy relative everyone warns you about, but hopes you'll never actually meet. Well, at 4:56 p.m. on May 25th, 2008, I got the introduction nobody wants. The sound hit first. People always say it's like a freight train, but that doesn't do it justice. This was like every freight train in America decided to have a convention right above my house, except they were all screaming and throwing things. The walls of my basement started shaking, not gently, not like when the washing machine gets unbalanced, but violently, like the earth itself was having a seizure. I'd grabbed my dog, Chester, and we were huddled in the southwest corner because that's what they tell you to do. Cover yourself with a mattress, get low, pray to whatever God you believe in. Chester was whimpering, which made my heart break because he's usually the toughest little terrier you've ever seen. If Chester was scared, we were all screwed. Then the pressure hit. It felt like someone was squeezing my entire house in a giant fist. My ears popped so hard, I thought my eardrums had burst. The temperature dropped what felt like 20 degrees in seconds, and suddenly I could taste dirt and debris in the air even though I was underground. The weird part is how your brain tries to process something that's completely beyond normal experience. I remember thinking, this is fine, this is manageable, even as I could hear my roof getting torn off above me. The EF5 had arrived, and it was hungry. What they don't tell you about a tornado this size is how personal it feels. This wasn't some random act of nature passing through. This thing seemed to have opinions about my neighborhood. It took its sweet time with each house, like it was shopping. I could hear it methodically destroying the Johnsons' place next door, the sound of their aluminum siding being peeled away like wrapping paper. Then silence for a moment, like it was deciding what to do with my house. My basement walls started cracking. Not little hairline cracks, but actual chunks of concrete falling onto my head. I'd always bragged about having the strongest foundation on the block, poured concrete, built to last forever. Forever, it turns out, lasts about 3 minutes when you're dealing with winds over 200 miles per hour. The pressure was so intense that I felt like I was being pushed into the ground, and Chester was pressed against me so hard I worried I might crush him. Above us, my entire life was getting redistributed across Butler County. The piano my grandmother left me, gone, probably embedded in some farmer's field 5 miles away. The photo albums, the wedding dress I'd been saving for my daughter, the collection of coffee mugs I'd been gathering for 20 years, all of it just became missiles in this thing's arsenal. But here's what really gets me. The randomness of it all. While my house was getting obliterated, the family across the street barely lost a shingle. Their lawn ornaments didn't even move. Meanwhile, my neighbor's car ended up 3 blocks away, upside down in someone's swimming pool. Makes sense, right? Nature doesn't follow any rules you can understand. The high school took the worst of it. That beautiful brick building where 3 generations of my family had graduated just got erased. Not damaged, not partially destroyed, completely gone. Later, we found pieces of the gymnasium bleachers scattered across town like giant metal confetti. The clock tower that had stood for 70 years just vanished, like it had never existed at all. When the sound finally stopped, the silence was almost worse than the noise had been. It was too quiet. The kind of quiet that means something terrible has happened. Chester and I sat there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Both of us afraid to move, afraid to find out what was left of our world. I kept thinking about all those graduation parties that were supposed to happen that weekend. All those families who'd been planning celebrations, buying decorations, making cakes. Instead, we were all about to become experts in insurance claims and FEMA paperwork. The dust was still settling when I finally worked up the courage to climb those basement stairs. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the railing. Chester stayed close, like he knew we were about to discover something that would change everything. What waited for us up there wasn't just destruction, it was a completely different world than the one we'd left behind. The silence was the first thing that hit me. After all that roaring like 100 freight trains screaming at once, suddenly nothing. My ears were ringing so hard I thought I'd gone deaf, but it wasn't that. The world had just stopped. I don't know how long we stayed crammed in that basement corner. Could have been minutes, could have been hours. Time gets weird when you're convinced you're about to die. Sarah was still shaking against my shoulder, and little Tommy wouldn't let go of my leg. The air tasted like dust and something metallic blood, maybe, though I couldn't tell whose. When we finally worked up the courage to move, the basement stairs creaked like they might collapse. Half of them were covered in pink insulation and chunks of what used to be our kitchen. The door at the top, gone. Just a gaping hole where our house used to be. Stepping outside was like walking onto an alien planet. I'm not being dramatic here. I literally couldn't recognize my own street. The Hendersons' blue 2-story that had been across from us for 12 years vanished. Not damaged, not destroyed. Gone. Like it had never existed. Just a concrete foundation with a few pipes sticking up like broken teeth. The weirdest part was the debris. A stop sign was wrapped around Mrs. Peterson's oak tree like a ribbon. A red pickup truck sat upside down on what used to be the miller's roof, except the roof was now in their backyard and the truck belonged to someone 3 blocks away. I found a family photo stuck in our fence, smiling faces I'd never seen before, probably from clear across town. Sarah kept saying, "Oh my God," over and over, but I couldn't make any sounds. My brain was trying to process the impossible. Our neighbor Jake emerged from his basement looking like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. His whole left side was covered in dust and his glasses were cracked, but he was walking. That's when the real shock hit me. We were alive. People started appearing from holes in the ground like prairie dogs. The Kowalskis crawled out from under their front steps. The teenage Morrison kids popped up from their storm cellar, crying and calling for their parents. Everyone was gray with dust and moving in slow motion like we were all sleepwalking through a nightmare. Then the shouting started. Jennifer, Jennifer. That was Bob Martinez, standing where his living room used to be, spinning in circles. His voice cracked on his daughter's name. The sound cut through the silence, and suddenly everyone was yelling. Names, addresses, desperate questions thrown into the air. I grabbed Tommy and told him to stay close while we searched for survivors. Sounds heroic, right? Truth is, I was terrified we'd find bodies. Every pile of lumber, every overturned car, every basement we approached, I was bracing myself for the worst. The smell was getting stronger too. A mix of natural gas, splintered wood, and something sour I didn't want to identify. We found the Morrison parents trapped under their kitchen table in what used to be their dining room. The table had saved their lives, but Mr. Morrison's leg was bent at an angle that made my stomach turn. Mrs. Chen was sitting in her driveway, perfectly fine, next to her car that had somehow been flipped completely upside down without a scratch on her. She just kept asking if anyone had seen her cat. The strangest rescue was old Pete Kowalski. We heard tapping from inside a pile of boards and metal siding. When we dug him out, he was grinning like an idiot. Turns out he'd been in his workshop when the tornado hit, and his workbench had created a perfect little cave around him. He crawled out holding a half-finished birdhouse, not a scratch on him. Been working on this for 3 weeks, he said, like nothing had happened. But then there were the spaces where voices should have been calling back. The Hartman house was just a hole in the ground with some scattered bricks. We called and called, but no one answered. Same with the Rodriguez family 2 doors down. The silence from those empty spaces was louder than all our shouting. Emergency sirens started wailing in the distance. Different from the tornado warnings, these were ambulances and fire trucks rushing in from neighboring towns. Help was coming, but looking around at the complete devastation, I wondered if there was enough help in the whole state of Iowa for this mess. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The destruction had a pattern to it, a clear path of total annihilation cutting right through the heart of our neighborhood. And looking east, following that path toward the center of town, I realized with growing horror where this monster had been heading next. I remember thinking the strangest thing when we finally crawled out of that basement. Everything looked like someone had put our town through a giant blender and hit puree. The silence felt wrong after all that chaos. You know that feeling when you're expecting another shoe to drop, but instead you get this eerie calm that makes your skin crawl. 8 people didn't make it that day. 8, let me tell you. When you live in a town where everyone knows everyone, losing 8 neighbors isn't just a statistic, it's 8 empty chairs at Sunday service, 8 families torn apart, 8 holes that can never really be filled. Makes sense, right? Well, what doesn't make sense is that most of them were doing exactly what they were supposed to do. They were in their basements, following every safety rule we'd been taught since we were kids. The Millers lost their grandmother in her basement on 7th Street. The concrete walls that were supposed to protect her just gave up. Betty Thompson, who ran the flower shop, was found 3 blocks from where her house used to stand. And the weird part is, her basement had been renovated just 2 years before. Reinforced, they said. Built to last. But when you're dealing with winds over 200 miles per hour, apparently even concrete has limits. Then there's the high school clock. Still gives me chills thinking about it. That massive thing stopped at exactly 4:56 p.m., the precise moment the tornado hit. Not 4:55, not 4:57. Exactly when that monster decided to tear our school apart brick by brick. It's like the tornado wanted to leave us a permanent reminder, a frozen moment in time saying, this is when your world changed forever. But here's where it gets really bizarre. While we were losing people and buildings, some of the most impossible things survived. The Henderson's cat, Mr. Whiskers, was found 2 days later sitting pretty in a tree about 4 miles east of town. Not a scratch on him, just sitting there like he'd planned the whole adventure. Meanwhile, their entire house was basically turned into toothpicks. Let's not forget Martha Kane's wedding dress. She'd been saving it for her daughter's big day next month, keeping it wrapped in plastic in her bedroom closet. The tornado took her whole house, and I mean the whole thing, foundation and all, but somehow that dress ended up draped over a fence post on the Johnson farm 5 miles away. Clean as a whistle. Not even wrinkled. Her daughter still wore it at the wedding, which happened right on schedule despite everything. The debris field stretched for miles in every direction. Golf balls from the country club were embedded in trees clear over in Butler County. Someone found a family photo from the Steinberg place stuck to a barn door 12 miles northeast. A refrigerator from downtown somehow ended up sitting upright in a cornfield, door wide open like it was just waiting for someone to grab a cold drink. Well, the rescue teams started pouring in before we even finished counting our losses. Fire departments from Cedar Falls, Waterloo, even as far as Des Moines. These volunteers showed up with their sleeves rolled up and their hearts on full display. Makes you believe in humanity again, watching strangers dig through your neighbor's rubble looking for family photos and wedding rings. And the weird part is how quickly we started finding the little miracles hidden in all that destruction. Tommy Rodriguez's baseball card collection, the one his dad started with him when he was 5, turned up scattered across 3 different yards, but every single card was accounted for. His rookie Griffey card was stuck to Mrs. Patterson's mailbox, not even bent. Then there's the piano at the Methodist church. The whole building was flattened, pews thrown everywhere, stained glass windows turned into glitter across Main Street, but that old upright piano, sitting there in the middle of what used to be the sanctuary, covered in debris but still in tune. Pastor Williams played Amazing Grace on it the next morning, and I swear there wasn't a dry eye for blocks. The strangest survival story belonged to the Kowalski family's goldfish. Their house got completely erased. I'm talking slab clean, but their daughter's goldfish bowls somehow landed in the neighbor's garden, water intact, fish swimming around like nothing happened. That little fish became our unofficial town mascot for weeks. But even with these small victories, the weight of those 8 losses pressed down on all of us. Every rescue worker's smile, every miracle story, every act of kindness couldn't quite fill those gaps. We were grateful for what remained, sure, but grief has this way of coloring everything else, even the good stuff. What came next would test whether our community could actually live up to all those promises about sticking together when times got tough. You know what they say about small towns? We're stubborn as hell, and Parkersburg proved that in spades. I'm talking about the kind of stubborn that makes you rebuild a house on the same foundation where a tornado just erased everything you owned. Makes sense, right? Well, maybe not to outsiders, but to us it made perfect sense. The morning after the EF5 ripped through our lives, I woke up expecting to see my neighbor's red barn through my bedroom window. Instead, I saw clear sky and a pile of twisted metal that used to be someone's pickup truck. That's when it hit me. We weren't just cleaning up after a bad storm, we were starting over from scratch. But here's the thing about Iowans that always surprises people. We don't sit around feeling sorry for ourselves for long. By 8 in the morning, before the insurance adjusters even knew our zip code existed, folks were already out with chainsaws and work gloves. My buddy Jake showed up at my door with coffee and a sledgehammer, asking if I needed help clearing debris. His own house looked like it went through a blender, but there he was, ready to help me first. The volunteers started pouring in from everywhere. Des Moines, Cedar Rapids, even some guy from Nebraska who drove 5 hours just to help move rubble. I'm not gonna lie, it was overwhelming in the best possible way. These strangers were treating our disaster like their own family emergency. One lady from Waterloo brought homemade lasagna for 30 people and wouldn't take no for an answer when I said I wasn't hungry. Trust me, I was hungrier than I thought. Then there's the insurance nightmare that nobody warns you about. You think you're covered until some guy in a cheap suit tells you that your act of God coverage doesn't include the specific way your roof decided to relocate 3 blocks over. The paperwork alone could have killed a horse. But we figured it out, one claim at a time, one argument with corporate headquarters at a time. The weird part is how fast things started looking normal again. Within 2 months, we had temporary trailers lined up where houses used to be. It looked like the world's most depressing RV park, but it felt like progress. Kids were riding bikes between the construction equipment, and Mrs. Henderson was already complaining about her new neighbor's dog barking too early. Some things never change, tornado or no tornado. Building the new high school became this whole community obsession. Everyone had opinions about where to put it, what color the bricks should be, whether the gym should be bigger than before. The school board meetings got heated, and I mean Iowa heated, which means people actually raised their voices and used words like disappointed instead of their usual polite nodding. The final design included that memorial wall I mentioned, with 8 names etched in granite that nobody in town will ever forget. Let's not forget the anniversary tradition that started completely by accident. The first year after the tornado, someone suggested we should have a moment of silence at 4:56 p.m. on May 25th. What started as a quiet memorial somehow turned into this whole community gathering. Now we do it every year. The fire sirens sound at exactly 4:56, and whoever's around stops what they're doing for a full minute of silence. Then we have a potluck dinner because, well, we're Midwestern, and that's what we do. The rebuilding brought out the best and worst in people, if I'm being honest. Some folks got generous with donated materials and volunteer labor, others got greedy, inflating their insurance claims or pocketing money meant for community projects. We found out who our real neighbors were pretty quick. The ones who stayed late helping clean up debris were the same ones who showed up with hot meals 6 months later when the initial excitement wore off and we were all just tired. 5 years later, you can still see the tornado's path if you know where to look. The trees that survived have this weird lean to them, and there are still random pieces of someone's life showing up in farm fields, a family photo here, a kitchen pot there. Kids who were too young to remember the storm now play on playground equipment that was donated by some company in California. But here's what nobody tells you about rebuilding after disaster. It changes how you think about everything. Your new house doesn't just replace your old house. It represents this choice you made to stay, to fight back, to bet on your community's future. Every nail you hammer feels like giving the finger to that storm. The thing is, we're not the same town we were before May 25, 2008. We're tougher, maybe a little more suspicious of clear spring afternoons. And when storm season rolls around each year, we all get that familiar knot in our stomachs wondering if lightning might strike twice.